When people talk about gauntlets in games, they're usually referring to a chain of back-to-back fights that must be cleared without a checkpoint. They're distinct from the endless modes you'd see in arcade or retro-inspired games, since those modes are built around trying to survive as long as possible and kill as many enemies as you can before you inevitably fall. But both are ultimately endurance tests. Endless modes spawn from arcades due to their social aspects where you compete with others to be at the top of a scoreboard. Gauntlets are distinct because they're usually not randomized the way endless modes need to be, and although they can be long and arduous, they have an end you're capable of reaching. When it comes to gauntlets in character action games like Devil May Cry, they're usually a separate game mode, and beating it is often one of the ultimate challenges in these types of games. It isn't just about beating the extremely difficult fight at the end, it's about getting there in good enough condition to beat it. Part of the endurance test in gauntlets like the Bloody Palace is seeing how well you can play and if you can stay alive through floor after floor of enemies, where enough mistakes will force you to start from the beginning. The reason I've spent this much time on the nature of gauntlets is because I want to ask a question that you already know since you read the title of the video. What makes a character action gauntlet good? Devil May Cry's Bloody Palace and Bayonetta's Witch Trials have been staples of their respective series, and since they keep coming back, they must be doing something right, but what is it? I'd argue it's a natural extension of what makes their core gameplay fun in the first place. Flexing. It's fun to throw enemies around and perform stylish combos, and gauntlets are a good way to show off and act as a sort of badge of honor. In most gauntlets of this nature, the floors get more difficult every 10 or so stages, with the last set of stages being set to the highest difficulty. This makes sense on paper since you'd expect the gauntlet to get harder as you go, but it's not as ideal as it may seem. Gauntlets, by their very nature, are usually pretty long. If they were short, beating them wouldn't be very impressive. With this understanding, making gauntlets start on lower difficulties and raising the difficulty as it goes seems intuitive, but there's a big problem with it. Since gauntlets need to be beaten from the beginning, and if you're seriously trying to beat it, you should go in expecting you have a reasonable chance of beating the last fight if you were there at full health. Let's use Devil May Cry 5 as an example. If you're trying to beat the Bloody Palace as, say, Dante, you're probably going to practice the Mission 19 fight against Virgil on Dante Must Die until you can consistently beat it without dying. If you can't consistently beat it, then it's not worth going through the Bloody Palace, since by the time you get to the end, you're just going to get your ass kicked. Granted, this isn't how everyone is going to engage with the Bloody Palace. If you don't go in expecting to win, then its appeal shifts to the same appeal as endless modes, but if you are playing with the mindset of wanting to win, it seems reasonable to assume that when someone goes in and knows what the final floor will be, they'll try to do anything they can to be prepared for that fight. This is the problem. If you've gotten to the point where you can consistently beat Virgil on Dante Must Die, then the first 80 floors of the Bloody Palace are a waste of time. It's not as if fighting enemies weaker than you is inherently a waste of time, since fights can still be challenging even if you can consistently beat them, since if they shave off enough of your health, then future fights are going to be more difficult. The problem with Devil May Cry 5's Bloody Palace is that the Devil Hunter and Son of Sparta floors are so much weaker than the Dante Must Die floors, that once I reached the standard of consistently beating Virgil, I never struggled with any of the first 80 floors. Now, I understand the appeal of a lower level gauntlet, I'm not trying to gatekeep what gauntlets can or cannot be, but if the point is to provide a hard but fun endurance test, players who want something more challenging aren't going to get that from modern gauntlet design. This is something that Bayonetta 2 tried to address by breaking up its gauntlet into parts, which did come with the advantage of leaving the really hard gauntlets for players who were ready for that level of challenge, while leaving lower tier gauntlets for players who want endurance tests that require less frame-perfect play. The downside here is that each mini-gauntlet was only 10 fights, which is pretty short, but given how hard the final one is, I think it was an acceptable compromise, but not the ideal of what gauntlets could be. But then again, is there an example of an ideal gauntlet? Isn't it just a necessary reality that if you want to ramp up difficulty, you have to start out small and work your way up? Well, the answer is no, and there's a game that's a prime example of how a character action gauntlet can be done perfectly.
余計な真似はするな。おいちょっと気をつけてくれよ。
見て見て、これ面白い。グレー。
Assault Spy is a character action game from 2018 that doesn't get nearly as much love as it deserves. The game has a lot of standout qualities, such as its mid-combat character swapping and pure character action gameplay with no pointless minigames or missions, but for the time being, I want to focus on how Assault Spy handled its gauntlet better than any other character action game. There are two gauntlets, the normal difficulty Death March, and the extreme difficulty Spy Must Die. This gives the best of both worlds, with a gauntlet for players who are still getting used to the game and want to hone their skills, and a challenge for players who have mastered the mechanics to put their skills to the test. If this was all it did, it wouldn't be so remarkable, but Spy Must Die stands out from other gauntlets and feels like a natural extension of the gauntlets of Bayonetta 2. Most other gauntlets start small with normal enemies, or in Bayonetta 2's case, mini-bosses. But Spy Must Die decides to start off with 2 bosses staring you down, and every 7 floors you have to do a double boss fight against every boss in the game, with the exception of Mr. Assault and Officer Joker, since their movesets would be too unbalanced if there was more than one of them, but even Mr. Assault gets some backup enemies. This builds on the foundation Bayonetta 2 set, where you often fought multiple boss tier enemies, but instead of a short 10-stage gauntlet, where it can sometimes feel more like a boss rush, Assault Spy paces Spy Must Die with a consistent rise in difficulty that still manages to be more challenging than what you've fought in the story mode, with 2-on-1 boss fights and waves of powerful enemy combinations, making it worthy of the title of hardest challenge in the game. Despite what I said earlier about practicing against Virgil for Devil May Cry 5's Bloody Palace, I don't think that's an ideal way to design a gauntlet, because then it means instead of a climactic final battle where the stakes are high, the fight becomes just as much of a formality as the easy stages. This is another thing Assault Spy does really well, since the final stage of Spy Must Die is fighting against Mr. Showtime and Chidori, which when put together makes for an incredibly tense fight, but it's so cathartic to actually beat them, especially knowing you went through everything else the game could throw at you and still ended up on top. To me, this is what a gauntlet should be. I understand the appeal of endless modes or other challenges you're not meant to beat, but gauntlets are defined by the fact that there is an end that you can reach. Like with many things Assault Spy does well, it did not pioneer this method of designing a gauntlet, but it did refine the concept and created one of the best character action games I've ever played. If you take nothing else away from this video, go and play Assault Spy right now, and always keep an eye out for smaller games that might be capable of reaching unexpected heights. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope you liked this type of content, as I'm interested in making some other videos that examine game design in ways that other people hopefully haven't done already. I also hope I didn't make Assault Spy out to be a try-hard game, because it really isn't. It's actually one of the most beginner-friendly character action games I've played, so I hope you'll give it a try if you're interested in the genre. I also started up a Patreon, so if you want to support my content, then that's a very direct way to do so, but even just liking, subscribing, sharing, and even watching these videos is more than enough support. If you're disappointed by the video's short length, then don't worry, the next video is going to be just a little bit longer. I hope I'll see you then.